If you're currently producing reports that look like this in Excel, please stop right now, because you can produce something that looks more like this, can sort and filter to your heart's content, and identify the key issues in no time at all.
Okay, so you've been presented with some data like this, and you've been told to put it into a monthly sales report. And you might be tempted to produce something perhaps that looks like this. And you think, oh yeah, I've done well there. I've got a little subtotals, a bit of, formatting. It's clear. I've even formatted the numbers to look nice. But do you know what? That would take you ages to produce, in my view. There are so many issues with it other than that too. So let's have a look at the issues we're trying to resolve before we turn it into a much more stunning looking report like this. The very first thing that I would find totally annoying about this is how inflexible it is. I mean, if I want to sort this by largest to smallest variances, if I go to the sort and filter, if I hit something like that, we've got the total reappearing in the middle of my report and things like that. If I want to filter it to just see, I'm only interested in office supplies, it's hard work. If I need to put new data in it, oh my word, I've got to start inserting rows, and then I've got to make sure that the formulas are picking up the right rows and things, which comes on to the second point, which is it's highly error prone. How can we be 100% sure that these subtotals are correct? This is a really small report, so you might think it's not an issue, but this could be going to hundreds of rows. And not only that, every single month when this data needs changing, it's almost as time consuming again. Even though you've got your report format set up, we want to move on to period 5. It might be different amounts of rows and columns. We can't be sure everything's going to line up. We've got to copy and paste the data in, make sure the totals are correct and things like that. It's just hard work. All of that pales into insignificance compared to point 4, and that is, it's just hard to read. What's the third highest sales volume in office supplies? What was the variance of that? What was the highest variance? What was the lowest variance? These sort of questions are just impossible to answer quickly. Data that looks like that. And in contrast, office supplies, what's the biggest variance? Well, it's down there, but I could equally sort it, and my largest variance is at the top. What about percentages? Got that. Highest sales highlighted for any thing we click on. We've got totals that are automatic. But the best thing about this is, if I take some new data, so let's just grab a bunch of random data on here, and we can literally just paste the values on the bottom, and look at that, it just adds it in instantly with all of this formatting. It's all in context again, just so much better. So now you know what you shouldn't do. Let's start by doing what you should do. So first things first, let's go and get our raw data. So I've come in here, I'm going to ignore the years and products, etc. I'm just going to copy that and go to here, and I'm going to actually paste it here. Obviously it looks a bit rubbish, but first off, I'll hit Control T, which is saying, do I want to create it as a table? To which I say yes. Now you might find that when you do that, you get quite often the default style might look like this or something like that. I quite like this one because it shows up any conditional formatting and highlights, and that's why I pick it. So that's that. Once you've got one, incidentally, you can set it as your default like that. And now I want to add a variance column, actual minus budget, so it'll be actual minus the budget, and there's our variance. So we'll just rename that column variance. And incidentally, I would also recommend that you give the table a decent name. So I'm going to call this TBL step 1, which is not a decent name, but it's going to be useful for when we carry on with the video. Second thing we can do is switch on the totals row. So on the table design menu, hit totals row, and we get a total come in. When we look at that, you can see it's a subtotal 109, which basically means sum whatever you see on the screen. If I hide a row, which I will do now, you'll see the total changes. It's only subtotaled the final column, which is the default it will do. But in order to get that on every column, you can grab the grab handle and drag it along and it will replicate that formula but in the context of the new columns. Don't copy and paste it incidentally, because it will always point to the variance column if you do that. We just need to tidy a few formats because our number formats don't look great. So what I like to do is highlight all of the numbers and then hit Control-Shift-1, which instantly produces a format which has 1,000 separators. And although it has 2 decimal places, you can knock them out on the home menu. You can either knock them out clicking this button here to decrease the decimals, or you can shortcut to that with Alt-H9, which I always remember. Alt-H0 is add a 0, i.e. add a decimal place, and then 9 is the one next to it, which will sort of remove it. So that looks much tidier already. And I just want to put on a report header as well. I'm going to leave a gap because, as you see in the previous one, we want to add a slicer in a minute. So I'm just going to copy and paste that header for the moment, but that's a pretty straightforward thing to do, just changing font colors and background colors. We've already got our kind of filters built in here, so we can already quickly sort and filter the data. But let's just put some icing on the cake by adding a slicer to it. So let's do that now. So on the table design menu, we can click on here and we see we have insert slicer, and I'm going to put one for the product category. And we've got one, it works, but it doesn't look fantastic. So what we need to do is just format this a bit more nicely. So you can see I've got a custom style. I'll show you how to recreate this in a minute. So you just pick a style that sort of matches that you're happy with. So say that will do. And then you duplicate that style and you'll instantly click on Format, Borders, and I'm going to say No Borders. And that's the only thing I would do with that, right? And nothing will change at first, but it will add it as a custom slicer at the top there. So I'm just going to do that, click on the custom slicer. By holding down Alt as I drag it around, I can have it snap to the grid. So I can snap it to the grid here. You'll see why I left a few rows in a minute. And there we go. And obviously it looks a bit rubbish, but there's this column setting at the top and say 3 columns. There we go. And then we can remove the grid lines. So on the view menu, remove the grid lines. And then there's one more thing I like to do with a slicer, which is right click on it and go to size and properties. And one of the properties you'll see is move and size with cells, or don't move with size. I would say on a table like this, move and size with cells, because then as you widen your columns, which I'll do now, for example, this one, by double clicking on it, the slice will stay in proportion to the table. So let's just demonstrate getting some more data here. So let's pick up this data here and paste it literally on top of the total row there, and it will add it in, and these totals will automatically pick up, and these variances formula will automatically copy down. Everything's still working perfectly. Hopefully you can see that that is easy when you know how type of work, but this is nothing compared to how impressive we're going to make it in a minute in step 2 when we add our visualizations to make it even easier to read. Here we are with our report as we had before. What we're going to do now is start adding some visualizations so that we can make this report very, very easy to interpret very quickly. So I'm going to add a new column on the end here, which is exactly the same as the variance column. So I'm just going to make it equal the variance column, right? And I've got a little trick here because we want to basically turn this into a data bar and we don't actually want a column heading. So the first little tip here is that we're going to format that cell. So format cells, and we're going to give it a custom format. And I won't explain too much about this, but essentially I'm going to give it 3 colons. And what that says is for positive numbers we don't want anything, for negative numbers we don't want anything, for 0 we don't want anything. And for text, we don't want anything. So basically, it's going to show nothing no matter what we type in that cell. And that way we've still got a column name. You can see it's still column 1, but we're leaving it blank. We're then going to add some conditional formatting. So we can hover over this column here and click there so that the whole column is highlighted. And we'll go to the home menu and do add conditional formatting. And we're going to add a data bar. Now, I would suggest that you pick this one because it's almost perfectly set up to go. So we'll click on that. And then we just need to click back on here and manage the rules. And we can see we can now edit that rule. And there's a couple of things I like to change. So first of all, we only want to show the bar only. So that's going to get rid of the numbers behind the scenes. And then rather than have automatic minimum and maximum, I like to use percentile. And the reason for that is if you've got an outlier in your data, it's not going to skew everything, because what you don't want is sort of some number in the thousands having like a huge data bar and then everything else in the hundreds being like tiny little data bars you can barely see. So I just leave it at 10 and 90 because it's the default, but you might need to play around with that. And then for negative values, you click on here, and the only change I would make is the red is a bit harsh. So sometimes I would change the red to the darker red. But more importantly, I would click on cell midpoint as the axis settings. That means everything is going to go around the center. And you're just going to apply that. And you can see now we're centered around the middle of the cell. And as we widen this, it gets wider or narrower. Because there's actually a number in that cell, we can now sort and filter on that cell. So we do this, or that, for example, we're now sorting by variance as if we were sorting this column here. So that's the first one. So that is the main variance. We're now going to add almost exactly the same. We're going to do a variance percentage. So we'll just divide the variance by the budget sales. You can see that drops down instantly. And if I hit Control Space, which is another way of highlighting the column, and Control Shift 5, we've now turned that into a percentage. Now I'm just using shortcuts, but of course you could have formatted those cells any way you wanted. Now I'm going to call that variance percentage or var percent because I don't really want to type the whole word and make the column really wide, but you get the picture. Now if I make another column, and this one I make it equal to that, take that whole column, so I'm highlighting that whole column, and I use the format painter and put it on there. What we've effectively done is create the exact same settings for our conditional format. So we've instantly basically created another data bar column here. So now we have our data bars for variances, and we can sort and filter by those various variances. Now we're going to have a go at adding our actual sales data bar. So I'm going to insert a column here, and if you insert it, you might say, well, logically put it next to the sales, but the problem with that is that if you add any new data in, your actuals and budgets, you're going to have to, copy and paste it over in chunks. And I want to avoid having to do that. This time I'm going to call it top actuals. Now I could do almost the same technique. I could make it equal to that. I could put a data bar on it, like say this one, and remove the numbers, and it would look fine. I'm not actually going to do that because I want to be able to conditionally format the top data bar in a different color to the rest, and the built-in data bars don't let me do that. But there is a great little technique that you can use to replicate data bars that I learned from Jordan Goldmar that I've adapted so that we can now conditionally format it and you can do other things with it as well. So I'll just briefly show you what this technique is. So on a new sheet, if I put, say, the number 10 in here, right? Imagine that was our variance, and this one is 4. Now, what I can do is use the repeat function to repeat like a character, and I'm going to use this key that's sort of above that backwards facing slash on the main keyboard. And repeat that by the number of times in the cell next to it. And when you change this number, so 50, you get something that looks a bit repeating that number. Now that doesn't look great as a data bar, but this is where the key technique comes in. Change the font to playbill. It actually squashes all those lines right next to each other. So as long as you're using the playbill font, it acts just like a data bar. So you can see here. So that's the technique that we're going to essentially use inside our table. We're just going to put in a couple of modifications to make sure that we're not going to have incredibly wide columns and huge data bars and stuff. Bit of prep work first. What we need to know is what is the maximum value that we're going to be creating a data bar for. So let's just call this max, and I'm going to make this dynamic by linking it to the actual sales column. So max of the actual sales column. Now, interestingly, I just noticed it says step 13 is the table name. So probably if we go back on this table here, let's call this step 2 table, and it just makes it, the formulas easier to read. So that's our max. I'm just going to put that sensible format, right? And then I'll say, right, okay, and what do we want our scale to be, right? Now, this can be typed any number, but this is kind of essentially, if you think about it, as the maximum width you want the data bar. So 100 would be kind of that wide. So if we say something like at 50, perhaps, you might say 50 is as big as it needs to go, right? So let's do that. So we'll go in here and we'll say our scale is 50. And I'm going to give these two a name range. So I'm going to call that N max, max actual, sorry. I'm going to call that N max scale. So what we need to do is we need to repeat this symbol, and we need to repeat it by the actuals divided by the maximum, and then times it back up by the scale. All right, and we'll hit enter, and we'll get our crazy looking thing, and then we will hit Control Shift there to highlight the column, and then I'm going to change it to playbill. Just typing, starting to type until I say playbill, and there we go. And then we might say, actually, do you know what? We can afford to go more than 50, we can afford to go to 60, and we've got this sort of maybe even 65, perhaps not 65, perhaps 60. And there we go. Now we've got our formatted data bar. So we can change it to any color we want by using plain text icons here. So let's pick, say, that. But why have we gone through all the effort of recreating essentially what a conditional format could have created almost instantly? And it's so that we can apply some conditional formats and highlight extra things that we wouldn't be able to do with traditional kind of conditional formatting. So, for example, we can highlight the top sales number or the bottom sales number or the top 5 or the bottom 5 or any kind of things that we want to do. If we can create a formula that identifies the thing we want to highlight, we've now got free reign to create all sorts of highlights. So the one I'm going to create first is the maximum sales. And because we've got the maximum over here already identified, we could just create a formula that says that if that sales number is the same as that, make it yellow. Now you'd think actually that highlight cells rule would do the job, but it doesn't, trust me. What you need to do is create a manual rule. So you just got to bear in mind where the active cell is when you create this rule. So I'm in what is L11, right? So when I go in the formula here, I just need to say that equals that one there, so J11, and I want to get rid of the $ from the row 11 because we want it to scale wherever we put this format. I'm just going to say it's greater than or equal to, just in case there's a bit of a rounding issue or something going on, and click on max sales, which is fixing the format, which is fine. And then the format is the font color, because it's actually a font color, it's yellow. So I'll hit OK on that, and then go back into that manage rules there. You'll see that it only applies to L11. So I just need to make sure it applies to that whole column there, like that. and apply it. And there we have it highlighting our largest sales number. Now, there's one slight issue with this, and that is that when I filter, because we're highlighting the top sales, it's not contextual within the filter. So one of the things that I like to do is, instead of making this the max, we can make use of the subtotal function. And the function number, if I type a 1, right, you'll see we do have a max, but we have 104. The function number will pick up the max visible on screen, which is what we want. So now, when I filter, it will just find the max within that can be seen. So this now is the max here is contextual on what's being filtered. So that just allows us to highlight that. And of course, as I've said here, if you wanted the top 20%, you could just say, change the conditional format to say format anything that's greater than or equal to the max times 80%. 50%, the top half highlighted, max times 50%. You could put a min on here and make it so that it goes red if it's the minimum. All manner of things you can do. So a couple of things we just need to tidy up briefly. So this we now need to snap to the grid so that it goes over to the right hand side. And if we sort of drag this over here, what I would do is probably move that one to the far right side there, and then drag this one over to there, just so we got a nice neat report header. So now you have a much more appealing, graphically appealing report than you had before traditionally, as in this one. But you also have all these superb benefits of being able to filter. You have context highlighting, and this filtering, of course, stays as well. The sorting stays as you click around. So I hope you agree that this looks infinitely better, because if you are the sort of person that's producing this, and now next period end, you turn it with something like this, somebody's going to think you've swallowed an Excel course and it's taken you 10 times the time. Whereas in actual fact, I think once you know what you're doing with this sort of stuff, this can be knocked out in probably less time than the traditional one, and will save you time in spades every single month end when you try and add more data. Look at this. Paste values, straight away it comes in. You've now got new highlighted things, new variances, sort, filter, as you please, and it's all just works. It just works. Highly unlikely to have any errors, highly likely for your manager to spot the key issues and actually do something about it and make decisions from your data, which is what it's all about.